What if everything you've been told about building good habits is wrong? Not slightly off, not missing a nuance. Fundamentally, structurally, philosophically wrong. In a way that explains why you've started over 100 times. Why your New Year's resolutions crumble by February. Why you bought the planner, downloaded the app, built the morning routine, and still find yourself at midnight doing exactly what you swore you'd stop doing? We've been handed a lie wrapped in motivational packaging. The lie goes like this. If you want to change your life, you need more discipline. You need to be stricter with yourself. You need to wake up at 5 a.m., cold shower yourself into alertness, and white-knuckle your way through the resistance until the habit sticks. We have podcasts dedicated to this philosophy. We have entire industries, supplements, productivity tools, self-help empires, built on the premise that what's standing between you and your best life is insufficient willpower. But here's what the discipline gospel never explains. Why do some people seem to do hard things easily? Not because they have superior genetics or some secret neurochemical advantage, but because they're operating from an entirely different internal framework. They're not gripping. They're not forcing. They're not white-knuckling anything. They are, in a word that doesn't translate perfectly from Japanese, but deserves to enter your vocabulary immediately, practicing Ichinen, the word that changes everything. Ichinen is a Japanese concept rooted in Buddhist philosophy. Broken down, ichi means one, and then means thought, moment, or mind. Together, the word points to something precise and luminous, a single, pure, unwavering thought, a moment of consciousness so total and complete that it becomes the seed of everything that follows. In the Buddhist tradition, specifically within Nichiren Buddhism, Ichinen is understood as the unit of life itself. Each moment of consciousness, each Ichinen, contains within it the entirety of your character, your history, your potential. How you inhabit this single moment is how you inhabit your life. The concept spread outward from its philosophical roots in a Japanese culture at large, and today it carries a pragmatic, lived meaning, a depth of resolve that transcends motivation, a clarity of intention so pure it makes external enforcement unnecessary. Ichinen is not a goal. It is not a habit. It is not even exactly a decision, though it begins with one. Ichinen is the quality of commitment from which everything else flows. It is the difference between wanting to change and being someone who has changed. This distinction sounds subtle. It is actually seismic. Why discipline fails you, eventually. Let's be precise about what discipline actually is. Discipline, as we commonly use the word, is the capacity to act in alignment with your intentions despite the presence of resistance. You don't want to run. You run anyway. You want to eat the cake. You eat the salad instead. You'd rather scroll. You open the book instead. There's nothing wrong with this as a short-term strategy. Discipline can carry you through a difficult week, a stressful month, a season of your life where everything feels effortful. But discipline has a structural weakness that nobody in the self-help industry likes to advertise. It is expensive. Discipline draws from a finite resource. The psychological research on this is robust enough to have a name, ego depletion, which refers to the way that acts of self-control draw on a shared cognitive resource that diminishes with use. The more decisions you force, the more resistance you overcome through sheer willpower, the less of that willpower you have available for the next battle. This is why the executive who maintains perfect professionalism all day loses patience with his children at dinner. It's why the person who eats impeccably during the week binges on the weekend. It's why you can stick to a diet for 3 weeks and then, one exhausted Tuesday evening, eat everything in the refrigerator. Discipline is a crutch, a useful one, but a crutch nonetheless, designed to help you walk when you're injured, not to replace the use of your own legs. The deeper problem with discipline is philosophical, not just practical. Discipline frames the self as fundamentally divided. There is the disciplined self who wants to do the right thing, and the undisciplined self who wants to do the wrong thing. These two selves are in perpetual combat. The goal of discipline is for the first self to defeat the second, day after day, indefinitely. But what if the real problem isn't that you lack the strength to win this war, but that you're fighting it at all? Ichinen and the end of internal war. When someone operates from a place of genuine Ichinen, they have resolved the civil war, not by winning it, but by ending the conditions that created it. Here's a simple illustration. Imagine a person who has decided to stop drinking. Two paths forward. Path 1. Discipline every time alcohol is present. They fight the urge. They remind themselves of reasons not to drink. They white-knuckle through social situations, calculating and resisting. The urge is always there, just below the surface, held at bay by effort. They are one particularly hard day away from a relapse. Not because they're weak, but because resistance requires energy, and energy is finite. Path 2. Ichinen, this person has had a moment, a single, crystalline, non-negotiable moment of clarity, in which they realized fully and completely who they are now, not who they're trying to become, who they are. They don't fight urges because the identity from which urges arise has been superseded. When alcohol is offered, the answer comes not from effortful decision-making, but from a deeper place. That's not who I am anymore. There is no war. There is only clarity. The second person isn't stronger than the first. They're operating at a different level of the mind entirely. Ichinen, at its core, is an identity shift, but more than that, it is a moment of complete seeing that makes the shift real rather than aspirational. It is the moment you stop trying to become someone and simply become them, in a single breath of total commitment. What Ichinen actually looks like. At this point, a reasonable objection arises. Isn't this just motivation with a Japanese name? Aren't we just talking about being really inspired? No, and the distinction is critical. Motivation is emotional. It rises and falls with your mood, your energy, your circumstances. Motivation is what gets you to the gym the first Monday of a new year and abandons you by Thursday. Motivation is the feeling that follows a transformative speech, a devastating doctor's appointment, a breakup that clarifies your priorities, and then quietly dissipates as the ordinary texture of life reasserts itself. Ichinen is not an emotion. It is a stance toward reality. It is closer to what the philosopher William James called a will to believe, not a belief adopted because the evidence compels it, but a belief adopted because you understand that acting as if it's true is the only way to make it true. Ichinen is the conscious choice to inhabit a future self so completely that the future self begins to shape the present one. There's also a crucial element of groundedness in Ichinen that distinguishes it from motivation's volatile energy. Ichinen is quiet. It doesn't need to be loud. People operating from genuine Ichinen don't post daily affirmations. They don't need accountability partners or habit trackers. They don't need external scaffolding because the structure is internal. They've built something that doesn't depend on conditions being favorable. A person with Ichinen toward their health doesn't need to decide to exercise when they're tired. The decision was made at a deeper level, prior to any given Tuesday morning. What remains is simply the doing. The moment of Ichinen, how it happens. You cannot schedule Ichinen. You cannot workshop it into existence. But you can understand the conditions that allow it to emerge, and you can stop doing the things that prevent it. Ichinen tends to arise in what the Japanese call ma, the space, the pause, the silence between things. It happens when you stop filling every moment with noise and distraction and allow yourself to confront something unvarnished. Who you actually are, what you actually want, what your life actually means to you. For some people, Ichinen arrives after a crisis, a diagnosis, a loss, a failure so complete that all the previous versions of yourself become clearly inadequate. These moments strip away the comfortable fictions you've been living inside and leave you facing something true. From that truth, a genuine commitment can be born, not a desperate resolution, I'll never do this again, but a quiet certainty, I know who I am now. For others, Ichinen arrives not in crisis, but in stillness, in meditation, in a long walk, in the honest conversation you have with yourself at 3 a.m. when the performance has stopped and the real questions finally have room to breathe. What do I actually want my life to look like? What kind of person do I genuinely want to be? What would I do if I wasn't afraid? The common thread is honest confrontation with reality, including the reality of yourself. Ichinen cannot be built on self-deception. If you tell yourself you want to write a book, but what you actually want is the status of having written a book, the Ichinen won't hold. It will dissolve the first time writing feels hard, because the commitment was never real. It was a performance for an imagined audience. Genuine Ichinen emerges when your stated intention and your actual desire are in alignment. When what you say you want and what you truly want are the same thing. This alignment is rarer than we admit. And much of the discipline problem that people experience is actually a misalignment problem. They're trying to force themselves toward goals that don't actually resonate at a deep level. Ichinen in practice, the texture of daily life. So what does a life lived from Ichinen actually look like? Not philosophically, practically, day by day. It looks like consistency without rigidity. The person operating from Ichinen shows up regularly, not because they've built an unbreakable chain they're afraid to snap, but because showing up is simply congruent with who they are. They don't need the streak. They don't catastrophize a missed day. They return without drama, because the commitment exists at a level that a single skip session cannot touch. It looks like effort without suffering. Hard work, yes. Discomfort, certainly. But not the particular suffering of someone forcing themselves to do something they fundamentally don't want to do. The person with Ichinen toward their craft experiences the resistance of difficulty, the frustration of not being able to execute what they can envision, the fatigue of long hours, but not the existential resistance of someone who wishes they were doing something else entirely. It looks like clarity in the face of temptation, not absence of temptation. Ichinen doesn't make you a different species. But when temptation arises, the response is different. It is almost bored in its certainty. That's not for me. Not a battle. Not a negotiation. Just a clear, untroubled recognition of who you are. It looks like the ability to begin again. Perhaps counterintuitively, Ichinen makes it easier, not harder, to recover from failure. Because the commitment exists at the identity level, a single failure doesn't shatter it. You didn't fail to be the person you're trying to be. You had a moment that was incongruent with who you are. You return to yourself. This is fundamentally different from the discipline-based model, where every failure is evidence that you're not disciplined enough, feeding a shame spiral that makes the next failure more likely. Cultivating Ichinen. Where to begin? If Ichinen is not a technique, it cannot be taught as a technique. But there are practices, orientations toward life, that create the interior conditions in which Ichinen can take root. Begin with honest inventory. Before any change, any commitment, any new direction, sit with the question of what you actually want, not what you think you should want, not what would make your parents proud or your social media followers impressed. What you want, from the deepest, quietest place in you that you rarely let yourself hear. This is harder than it sounds. Most of us are so saturated with external signals about who we should be that we've lost the thread of who we actually are. Practice the single moment. Ichinen is, at its root, about the quality of attention you bring to this moment. Before you can make a total commitment to a direction in life, practice making a total commitment to the present moment. Put the phone away. Be completely in the conversation you're in, the meal you're eating, the work in front of you. This practice of singular presence is the training ground for Ichinen. It teaches your mind what wholeness feels like. Let yourself be changed by what matters. We live in a culture that prizes ironic detachment, the stance of nothing really matters, everything is content. Ichinen requires the opposite. It requires you to let things land, to let a book devastate you, to let a failure genuinely teach you something, to let the people you love genuinely matter. Porousness to experience is a prerequisite for the kind of insight from which Ichinen can emerge. Stop managing yourself and start trusting yourself. The discipline framework treats you as a problem to be managed. Systems, reminders, accountability, all of it is useful, but if it becomes the primary relationship you have with yourself, it prevents the development of genuine self-trust. Ichinen requires trusting that your commitment is real, and then acting accordingly, without constant external reinforcement. The bridge between Ichinen and action. One final clarification, because this matters. Ichinen is not passivity. It is not sitting in a state of pure intention and waiting for the universe to cooperate. It is not an inner peace that exempts you from doing the work. Ichinen is the source of action, not a substitute for it. When a master craftsperson picks up their tools, the decades of skill in their hands are Ichinen made physical. When a great teacher walks into a classroom, the complete presence they bring to each student is Ichinen in practice. When an athlete performs at the outer edge of their ability, accessing something beyond what training alone can explain, that is Ichinen burning through. The commitment is invisible. The results are not. What changes when you operate from Ichinen rather than discipline is not the amount of work you do. It may not even be the quality, at least not immediately. What changes is the nature of your relationship to the work. You stop needing to overcome yourself to begin. You stop losing energy to internal resistance. You stop operating as a divided self, fighting a constant civil war. And you start operating as someone who is, however imperfectly, whole. And wholeness, it turns out, is more powerful than any system, more durable than any streak, more effective than any amount of forced discipline. The question you have to answer. We return, finally, to where we began, not with an answer, but with a more precise version of the original question. The issue is never discipline. You have plenty of capacity for effort. You demonstrate it constantly in areas of your life where you're not fighting yourself. The issue is whether you have identified, with genuine clarity and honesty, who you are and what you're truly committed to. Not what you're trying to become, not what you've resolved to do. Who you are. That question, sat with long enough, honestly enough, quietly enough, is where Ichinen is found. Not as a technique you apply, not as a mindset you adopt, but as a recognition, a moment in which you see yourself clearly, commit completely, and begin living from that commitment forward. The Japanese say that in a single Ichinen, the entire universe is contained. A single moment of pure thought carries within it infinite potential. What you do with this moment, how completely you inhabit it, how honestly you bring yourself to it, is the question your life is asking you. You don't need more discipline. You need one moment of complete truth. Everything else follows from there. In one moment of Ichinen, 3,000 realms are contained. Nichiren Buddhist teaching.